it's Shay, and we're going to go ahead and start with our next project in Photoshop. This project is going to be dealing with using Photoshop to composite photos, or I guess you could call it create photo collages. But you're basically going to be taking at least two photos and combining them into one photo. And that's something that Photoshop is extremely good for and used for pretty often. So that's what this project is going to be. And this is a project where if you've got some personal photos that you want to combine, you can do that. Or you can go to some of those sites I had you look up earlier where you can download copyright-free images. I grabbed a couple photos from a site called unsplash.com. They are available for use copyright-free. So on here, what you want to do is you'll just want to kind of think about what you want to put together. Maybe you want to put together a scene of some sort that tells a story, or maybe you want to put yourself in a new location. Maybe you've got a photo of you that you want to put, I don't know, in some sort of exotic locale. But I'm going to do something, and I'm going to just use a couple animal photos for this. So you just go and browse around, and this just gets down to playing and having some fun with your ideas and trying to come up with some fun ideas to try to realize. So I went on here and did some searches for animals, and then you can also search for, let's see, I did some search for interiors and nature, but you all have some that you found in a previous week, but you can go to Unsplash and look there too. Just wherever you want to grab them from, that's fine for this. So I did some searches for architecture and came up with a couple photos of animals and architecture. So the way we're going to start with this is you'll download your photos and download them at the highest resolution you can. Like on Unsplash, when you go to download, let's just pick one, download free. So you can download a small, medium, or original size. Whichever of these has the largest numbers, that's going to be the largest size. It's going to have the most detail. And the more detail you get in your photos, the better off you're going to be when you're trying to edit them. So always, wherever you download from, grab the largest size image you can get. Okay? And then once you've done that, you'll want to open them up in Photoshop. So I've got this photo that I've downloaded, and then I've got this photo of this rooster. So I'm going to combine these. I like monster movies, Godzilla, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to have this giant rooster terrorizing this rainy street in the city, downtown. So the first thing you want to do is, like you notice when you open this photo, you've got a background here. The background is the photo. I'm going to go to the rooster image. I'm going to go to select all. And then I'm going to go to edit, copy. And go back to my photo here. I'm going to go to edit, paste. So there's my photo. What I want to do is, okay, puts this rooster layer on top. Okay. I want to be able to see through this and kind of get an idea of size and position. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the opacity down some on layer 1, just so I can kind of see through. And, you know, depending on the image, this might be a little difficult to see through, but I can kind of, I know that I want to put the rooster behind this building right here and in front of this building. Okay. So what I'm going to do is kind of zoom up and take a good look, and I think the size is good for him because he's going to be like a giant rooster. So I'm going to just kind of position him about where I want him to be. So when I'm looking up over the top of this building, behind this building in front, and so we get a little bit of his side peeking out from behind it. Now all of this down here will be masked off, right? Because we're going to create a mask that hides him behind here. Okay. So what we want to do is when you're working in Photoshop and working on a layer, you bring it over. Typically, pixels fill this layer, right? Now, if you turn the background layer off, you'll see this checkered pattern. That means that there is transparency available in this layer, which is going to always be the case. what that means is I can go in with the erase tool and on this layer, make sure I've got my opacity up all the way up here on my eraser tool. And I can get a big brush and I can go in and erase, erase, erase. And that will remove those pixels. And then I can erase all the way around this. Just get right up on the edge. Okay, and erase that out. And that's great, and that's, you know, a way to do it. But if you screw something up and erase too much and move on too far, you can't go back. You can't correct anything. So instead, what you want to do is, rather than erasing this, Photoshop has the ability to create what are called masks, and think of it like a stencil. So you can stencil out areas to hide and stencil areas to be shown. So what you do is, on your layer here, with the layer you want to cut something out from, you can go to Layer and click down at the bottom of that palette, and it will create a layer mask. You see this chain, this means this layer mask is connected to the photo. Okay? Now it's white and nothing is hidden. So that means that I need to add color to this to hide anything. So the way this works, think of it like this. When you create this layer mask, if you look up here as I click, I want to paint out a mask, so I need to have this mask selected. And then I'm going to get my brush tool and I'm going to select black for the foreground color. Okay, and if it's not the foreground color, let's say you have white in the foreground, then you can click this double-sided arrow and get black. Or let's say you've got another color, all you've got to do is click here and get black. Okay. Then what I can do is I can go in, and this can take a long time if you want to get a really good clean edge. And you know, it's worth it. And this is a situation where if you have a drawing tablet, this goes a lot quicker. But you can, basically, you're painting black on this mask to create transparency. Okay. So what you can see is, if I look in my window channel palette, it's over here. See, this is layer mask 1. That's this. If I turn the eyeball on here, I can see it in red. If I turn everything else off, this is what I'm painting in this layer. Okay, but what I want to do is I want to paint on my transparency here. I just kind of slowly go in and get a really good, as clean a mask as I can. And what happens is you can change the brush. Again, you can right click and you can have a softer edge, a larger brush. So if you've got an area that's really soft, that you need a softer mask on, like up here, and you don't want a real hard edge, you can do that and have a softer brush, or you can have a harder brush if you need a good, real crisp line. And you can turn this off here and go back to your layer, and you're still painting. Okay, so you get the idea, right? And eventually what you end up with is, oops, something not that much, but you can go in and take off fairly large chunks of this. Now, something else you can do is, rather than trying to do this all with a brush, because this photo has a very clear focal point, being the rooster, let's try this. Let's go to select subject. So Photoshop kind of guesses that this is the main subject, and I'm not sure exactly how it does it. I guess it probably has to do with the degree of sharpness, how sharp an object is, because you can see the rooster is really sharp in terms of the detail, and the background is really blurred. So it will go in and make a selection around this. Okay, and there are some different settings you could use. So you could change the smoothing, turn that up, and go to select subject. It didn't do a whole lot there. But what that does is that creates a selection. Okay, and what you can do with the selection is you can, with the selection made, and you see this line around it, that's called a marching ant line. That indicates anything inside of that line is selected. So if I get my brush and paint on my mask, well, that erases everything. Now this is not the part I want to erase. So what I can do is, with this selection loaded, I can go to the select menu and do an inverse. Now you can see it inverts the selection. What I can do then is, with a great big old giant brush, I can just boom, boom, boom. And I've gotten rid of most of that. Then I can deselect. So just go to select, deselect. Okay. And so now I've got this. Now that selection mask we did, select subject, it didn't get everything. Like, I've got to go back and kind of clean up some stuff here. And maybe get a smaller brush and go in here. And again, how much you want to do this, how detailed you need to be on this mask is kind of your call to make. Like, how convincing do you want this to be? It's up to you. All right, so what you end up with there is something like this. I've got a good clean mask. Now what I want to do is, I've masked off all that I want, but all this information is still there. All this background information is still, and you can see it here in your thumbnail. Right. I want to apply this mask so it actually gets rid of everything that's hidden. So I'll click here, make sure that's highlighted. And you click on that layer and drag it to the trash. Apply mask before removing. So what this is going to do, it's asking me if I want to delete all the pixels that I've hidden with a mask, and I do. So now I've got a layer that's just these pixels and nothing else. Okay, and that's important because I'm going to add now another mask. Okay, and I could have left the other on there, but it gets really complicated trying to stack mask on top of mask. But the same idea is, I want to remove more of the rooster. Okay, I want him to appear behind this building, so I need to remove everything that looks like it's in front of this building. Okay, the way I'm going to do that is, I'm going to go with this layer selected. Again, it's just the layer, it has no mask. With it selected, I'm going to do a new mask. You can see it adds that again. It's white. I want to make sure I've got black. And in this case, I'm going to drag this down to a fairly low opacity. And actually, I could probably make that 0, because I really just need to see, at this point, the thing I'm putting in front there. So I'm going to clear it up enough where I can see that building pretty closely. And I'm still working on this layer mask. And this is one of those tricky things about Photoshop that you may have to watch a couple times to get the hang of it. Now what I want to do is, I've got a fairly square shape here. It's blurry, but it's fairly square and straight lines. A couple ways I can make this a mask. I'm going to use the polygon lasso tool. And what I know is if I can click and click and click and click and then double click, that'll let me create a selection with very sharp straight edges. Okay, so I'm going to go and click. Now this is fuzzy, so I'm going to try to find the middle of the, or what's as close to the sharp edge of this as possible. So there's a corner there. So this is where, you know, the photo you choose also matters for this. And I'm trying to find the hard edges of this building. There's a hard edge there. It's here, here, here. Okay, so I've got this edge pretty close, and then I can just go in and click as far outside of that as I want to. And then maybe, just in case, I'll click here, 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 and then kind of line that up right there and double click, and it completes that selection. Okay, now I know that this is selected, so I know that it isolates the pixels inside the selection from the pixels on the outside. I can go back and get my brush, get a large brush by right clicking, get my black loaded, and if I turn the opacity back up here on that layer, oh, I've done something wrong here. Okay, I accidentally selected on the rooster here. All right, so let's go back. There we go. So I'm painting inside this selection. All right, so now he looks like he's behind this building. A couple problems we have to deal with now is this edge here is really sharp. It's a really sharp edge on that mask because we used this lasso tool. So we want to blur that up a little bit. I'm going to get a smaller brush. Down here, you'll have the smear tool or smudge tool. If you click and hold, you'll get a blur tool. You can select the blur tool, select the strength, and you can go in and on the layer mask part here, that's the one on the right, you can go in and using that blur tool, soften that edge. Okay, and you want to soften it more to mimic what it looks like here on the photo. By doing that, it's going to help blend in your image a lot better. Give it a softer edge, it fits better. So I can go in and manually blur it like that. I could also go in and see, go to Filter, Blur, and do Gaussian Blur. And you get a little preview of what it's going to do your mask here, of whichever you've got selected. If I crank the radius up, I get a softer edge, and you can see it here. You can zoom out and get a better overview of what it's doing. Okay, so when I really crank this up and blur it out, this really starts to be too much, right? We're not maintaining that edge exactly the way we want it. So I can go in and that, if I zoom out.
I didn't get that. Oh. Could you try again?
All right, so we can zoom out and see that seems to fit that blur around this building better. Okay, so that's one thing. The first thing we've got to do is blur up this mask a little bit. The next thing I know is, okay, this person here is in focus. They're the main focus of the original photo. So they're the sharpest amount of detail. Everything beyond them is part of the depth of field of the photo. It's where you lose sharpness and you get this fuzziness. So you can see this building is fuzzy. The buildings behind it are even more fuzzy because of the depth of field. The rooster is really sharp and really clear. So we need to make sure that the rooster does not appear so sharp. So I'm going to go back to this layer and click here to make sure I've got the rooster and not the mask selected. Okay, so when you're working with layer mask, just kind of be aware of what you're working on. Make sure you've got the image itself selected if you need to blur it. So we'll select the image, not the mask, and go to Filter, Blur. And you get the preview here, and you can zoom out. There he is, and you can zoom up some. And that'll show you what it looks like, a closer up view. And if preview is selected, it'll apply it to the photo too. Okay, and so you can turn that on and off, toggle it to kind of get an idea. Now, he's still not blurry enough. It's still too sharp to be in that particular space, the depth of field. So I'm going to really crank that up. Okay, so now that's obviously too much. So let's go. Now, when I look here, we lose just a little bit too much detail at 13.4. And I want to do is try to keep some of the detail of the head and the eye. That eye is like the most important part. But that's pretty good. He's blurry. So I'm gonna go with that. And hit OK. And then I like to kind of hit Edit, Undo, and then Edit, Redo, just to toggle that and make sure I like where I'm at. So now he looks more like he's in the same space in the photo as this building. Okay, he looks like he's in the proper space for the depth of field of the photo. So that's two things now we've done to blend this together. The third thing we want to do is we want to really think about color and hue and saturation of the image. Now, this original image really has a lot of blues, a lot of cool colors, a lot of grayish and overcast, where the original rooster photo, he's really saturated and really colorful, right? So what I need to do is I need to make his color fit the photo of this environment better. So again, with the rooster layer selected, I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and I'm going to select Hue and Saturation. And you've used hue and saturation some probably for the colorization project. What I want to do is try some of these. So the environment is desaturated, so we want to desaturate the rooster a little bit. We don't want to take all that color out, right? But we want to make it not so saturated. So I'm just going to bring that down just a little bit. And I might play around with the hue slider to see if I can. Now see, I can't give it that blue cast that I wanted. All right, so the hue is not something I want to change in this instance. Okay, lightness. No, that doesn't look right. We lose some of the detail in it. So maybe just make a small adjustment to the lightness and hit OK. Or I can, if I hit turn preview on and off, then I can check it and see. And that actually looks pretty good with just a little bit of a lightness adjustment. So hit OK. Now the color's still not right. It still doesn't have that bluish color that I want. So I'm going to go back to Layer, or actually Image and Adjustments. Adjustments is where you can make changes to color, to contrast, to lightness and darkness. All those are here. And if I click on Photo Filter, what that allows me to do, it allows me to provide or apply a filter that either warms or cools a photo. And so it's got a list of selections. Now I know the photo is more blue, so I'm going to try out a cooling filter. Okay, that did a little bit. If I can drag this slider, that's way too purple, right? I don't like that. Or I can do the second cooling filter, and none of those really give it that kind of greenish color that I want, that kind of, or this grayish green that I'm looking for. So I'll go down to, let's see what green does. That's too green, maybe cyan. And maybe we'll crank this up a little bit. Violet. And, you know, typically I'll just try all these until I find something that looks pretty good. And really, I think cyan is our best bet, maybe. And as I increase this, it adds to it, but I don't like it that much, so. And if I toggle preserve luminosity on and off, that affects it a little bit. And again, a lot of Photoshop is just playing around. See, okay, so there we go. So that looks better. If I undo that, this is where I started. And that's where I ended. So there and there. Not a huge difference, but it makes a big difference, if that makes any sense. All right, so now he feels like his color is a little bit better. I'm going to go back to hue and saturation. Just maybe do one more little adjustment to saturation, because it looks like it's a rainy day, so he's going to be in the rain, and that's going to affect the way color looks too. The last thing I'm going to do here is he's behind this building, so I want to add a little bit of a shadow to give it a little bit of depth and indicate that he's behind there a little bit more. So over here on my tool palette, I'm going to select my burn tool. The burn tool will darken images in different ways. I'm going to select a decent sized brush, and I'm going to use a very soft edge on it. Now up at the top here, you've got, for the burn tool, you've got a range of midtones or shadows or highlights. This is what you're going to darken. You can either darken the highlights. So if I click darken highlights, it's going to find the lightest parts of the image and darken those and leave the midtones and the shadows unaffected. If I select midtones, it's going to darken the midtones more. And this is one of those things you kind of play around with. You'll figure it out more. Shadows, it's only going to darken the darkest areas. Or it's most strongly going to darken the darkest areas. So midtones actually seems to get this area I want to darken. Exposure is like how intense that is. I like to work with the exposure at a very low setting and build up. And I'm going to get a little bit bigger brush here and just do some quick passes. Okay, so now we've created a little bit more depth. Maybe have gone too much, so I can undo that a couple times and turn my exposure back down even more. And just do this in really small little steps. But all in all, for a quick 30 minutes of work, that works pretty well for me. So then what I can do is I want to merge this into one single layer. The way you do that is you go to Layer, Flatten Image. Now when I do this, it's going to get rid of my mask and I'm not going to be able to adjust anything. So I'm going to hit OK. Now I've got one single layer, which everything is in. If I wanted to, I could go in and run a little bit of filters. Let's say I want to kind of try to bring it a little bit more together. I can go in and blur the entire image just a bit, and I'm talking just enough to kind of merge it just a little bit more. It's not a huge difference, but it just blends that one little step more. I could go in and I could add noise to it, again, to kind of maybe blend that a little bit better. So this creates a little bit of a photographic noise Okay, now see how much better that blends in with just that little bit of noise. And I'm going to crank that down just a tiny bit to where it's really subtle. Subtlety is the key with using Photoshop. Okay, now that's pretty convincing. That looks like, it's there. It looks like things are in the right space. It looks more like a photo taken at one time. So play around with filters some too. Those are a lot of fun. You can do a lot of stuff with filters, but that's the idea of this assignment, is that you take two photos and put them together using layers and layer masks in particular. So what you want to focus on is learning how to use your layer mask. You want to focus on being able to adjust color so that they feel like they belong together. Sometimes that's oversaturating a color. Sometimes it's undersaturating a color. Sometimes it's changing the hue of a layer. So you'll need to play around with your adjustment layers some. And then you could play around with filters and see if any of those help to kind of bring it together one last little bit. All right. And once you've completed this, what you want to do is save it as a JPEG. So do File, do Save As, and actually, save it while you're working in case your computer crashes. But the one you turn into me, make sure it's saved as a JPEG file with your name and project number, which I think this is project 7, but I'm going to just put project number here. Do that, and then save it wherever you save your files. You want to use the largest file JPEG compression for this. Actually change it to a compression of high with quality of 8. That'll make it a 5 meg or a smaller file size. So see, here's the small file size will end up, it'll show the file size over here, right? I'd like it to be a not so huge file size. So let's do it about 8. And you'll get a more manageable file size. It shouldn't matter a whole lot in the end in terms of the quality of the photo or anything. It's just a way to kind of save space and make these things upload a lot quicker. Okay, so I want you to turn in your file to me. I'd also like you to include the downloaded photo so I could see the two you started with. Okay, and I'll put that all in the specs for the assignment. So that's the idea of it. I'll just show you another quick example that I worked up. All right, so we have bird on a skateboard. The original was this guy here on a skateboard. So I had to go in and take him out. And some of the tools you used in the photo restoration project you would use to get rid of him. I would create a second copy of the background. And I picked this because he's in front of this solid garage wall. I'm going to get my stamp tool or clone stamp tool. I'm going to get a good sized brush. I'm going to use the option. See, when I hold the option key down, that circle changes to this little target. And I'm going to go in and see that these things here repeat. I'm going to option click on that. When I option click, I'm assigning the clone start point. And you can see it in the pixel or in the brush icon there. As I move it, it's going to start right here. Okay, so I want to option click here to set this as my beginning, and that lets me go in and kind of align things. And then that's a quick way. Oops, we got his face. We'll fix that later. Depending on the background you've picked, this is a nice way to kind of clone things out. Now, I probably could have found a background that was completely clear and then gone in and found a skateboard that was pretty much clear. Okay, now what I want to do here is I want to start in the same spot here. So I'm going to set that again. This time I'm going to go over here and continue. And I got a little too crazy with my brush stroke, but that's okay. I'm going to get a larger one. And I'm going to continue to take him out of the photo. And again, I'm using the preview inside of the brush to align things. And I'll continue on with this until I end up with a background that looks like that. I had to go and do a little bit of extra work on the skateboard. Right, it was a little bit trickier, but I got that fixed. And then I brought my bird in and created my mask for the bird, which looks like that. I cut it out, then pasted him on top. And then he's a little bit oversaturated from the background, so I'll go in and do, let's see, oh, I gotta make sure I'm selected on that layer. Excuse me, need an adjustment of hue and saturation. And I'll just desaturate him a little bit. The other thing I did is we get a shadow under, excuse me, a shadow under the skateboard. So I'm going to get my brush tool. I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. I'm going to get black for my color here. And I'm going to get my brush and a soft edge. Pretty good. Let's see, about that size brush. And I'm going to just kind of line this up and draw a line out, straight line. Holding down the shift key will give you a straight line. Then I'm going to go to the filters, blur, do a motion blur. Now this, there we go. So what the motion blur does is, by rotating this, it changes the direction that blurs. Now if I look at the shadow on the skateboard, it's blurring horizontally pretty much with no angle. Okay, so I'm going to do that. The further the distance, the more it blurs. So I'm going to do that. Now I can move it, get the selection, or get the move tool. With that layer selected, I can go in and can move this and put it under there a little bit more. I can take the opacity down a little bit. I can change that to multiply to help it blend in a little bit better. Take the opacity down even more. Again, subtlety is important here. So try to be subtle with the stuff you're doing. Now it's really thick, too thick probably. So what I can do is go to image, let's see. Adjustments. I want to do an image transform. That is Command T on your keyboard. It's also somewhere up here, but I just know the keyboard command by heart. And if I click and drag that, it lets me, if I hold down the Option key or the Command key, it lets me grab one of those squares and I can kind of go in and change the shape of that a little bit and the thickness of it. All right, and then I like to go in and turn it on and off. And it's almost there, but I think it could be blurred a little bit more. So we'll go back. I'm going to do a Gaussian blur on it. which blurs the whole thing, not in a direction, right? But I've got to make sure that's the layer I've got selected. So do that. Blur, Gaussian blur. And now we've got a skateboarding bird with a shadow where we started with that guy. All right. So again, this is a really fun assignment. Gives you a chance to just play and have some fun. And again, these are also the most powerful Photoshop tools. And once you've kind of got a good handle on how to do all this stuff that we've been doing, and this last assignment here, you can, when you really learn those few key tools, you can do anything with Photoshop. Okay, so take some time and be creative and have some fun and push yourself with this assignment. Give me a shout if you have any questions. But I'll put the specs in this week's assignments and everything. And again, you'll have 2 weeks on this one. So you'll have this week, and then next week it'll be continuation. We won't introduce a new project next week. This will be the project for the next 2 weeks of class time. So I want you to spend time really learning how to do this, use these techniques, and get familiar with these tools. All right, y'all. Have a good week. Give me a shout if you have any questions. Thanks.